Welcome to the Alain Guillot podcast, a podcast about life, leadership, and money matters. Our guest today is Brian Castner. Brian is an author, journalist, and veteran of the Iraq War. He has written 4 books, and today we will speak about his latest book, Stampede, Gold Fever, and Disaster in the Klondike. Brian, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's great to be here. Thank you for the invite.
So it's great to know about the drive that, or the ambition that drove all these explorers to these remote parts of our geography in Alaska, in the Yukon territories. And you documented that very nicely in your book, Stampede. Before we get to the book, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your background. You had yourself a colorful background full of adventures, and I wonder if you could tell us how, some of it.
Well, I'd like to tell you that there was some grand plan or scheme, but I don't think there was. I mean, I used to be in the U.S. military. I was a bomb technician. That's called Explosive Ordnance Disposal, or EOD. So, I mean, that's how I started my career and did a couple tours in Iraq during the Iraq War. And that eventually led to writing. I wrote a book about my time in Iraq, and I had a lot of struggles coming home and some of those readjustment challenges. And that led to journalism, and it led to other books. But like you say, on the adventure side, I've always loved the outdoors. I've always loved travelogue, books about travel, and especially books about the North. And whether, travels into the Arctic or, Krakauer's adventures on mountains in Alaska, all those kind of books have been a great influence on me. And so I ended up writing 2. I wrote Disappointment River, which is about the Mackenzie River in northern Canada. And then I wrote this new one, Stampede, on basically, it happens the next mountain range over, so to speak, in the Yukon Valley and the Klondike. And so, I mean, it makes sense to me in that, I think I always am trying to deglorify or demythologize a lot of these stories. I can't stand war stories that are, seem to make everybody look like a hero or, the glory with it. War is a bloody thing. And, this Klondike Stampede was also a very dangerous and really brutal campaign for a lot of people.
I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the job of bomb disposal. The only thing that I know about it, and I think most of the listeners of my audience, is what they see in the movie. Some guy comes with some weird equipment and he disposes of the bomb. But what? Give us
That's some of it. I
I
think most people, if they know anything about it, they know The Hurt Locker, right? Which was the movie that won the Academy Award. I mean, that movie is not like real life. It's Hollywood. I mean, that's maybe not a surprise. It's got about 5 minutes of reality in the beginning and 5 minutes at the end, and everything in between is kind of silly Hollywoodness. I mean, the bomb disposal job is... a lot of it is, I mean, the thing that attracted me is it's using your brain and then also using your body. You have to physically do something. So you have to understand all the different ways weapons work, ordnance works, bombs, hand grenades, improvised devices, all those roadside bombs from Iraq and Afghanistan. You need to understand how it works, but then you need to physically go do something about it. You need to use a robot, use your own explosives, use a tool to try to take it apart and make it safe. And so, I mean, I think again, this goes back to the deglorification of war. I mean, that's Hurt Locker is really, it's about making heroes out of these folks. And I think mostly we just try to do our job. And the truth is, like, it's dangerous work. I have a lot of friends who died doing it. And so it's really about minimizing risk. It's not about being a cowboy like you see in the movies.
And one more question about your professional life. Could you share some of the struggles that you had coming back home?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I had a variety of struggles. I had, post-traumatic stress, which just from the variety of things that I experienced, being faced with your own death, being faced with, every day we would go out and do a post-blast investigation on somebody that had been killed, whether it was local Iraqis, whether it was a U.S. soldier. You know, when you're exposed to that much death and destruction, it can really take a toll on you. But I also had a whole other set of stresses and grief and, you know, about the friends that I had lost, but also, you know, my last tour was in 2006 and the wars kept going. In fact, the war in Afghanistan is only, you know, Americans are pulling out now after 20 years. It's hard to come home from a war and your friends keep going back, and then your friends keep going back and sometimes get hurt and killed. And so there's this feeling of, some of it's guilt, some of it is just feeling like you're just not in the right place. Like if you're deployed with the people you're working with, well, you can keep them safe, but then you're not home with your family. If you're home with your family, then you're not, you know, keeping your brothers and sisters safe in combat. And it's just a very odd feeling of dislocation.
Wow, amazing. Okay, so then Stampede, I mean, this is your second book in regards to looking for gold and adventures. Can you tell us how you came about the subject of this book?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I don't think I have a good answer for it. Like, I think like many people, I had heard of the Klondike Gold Rush. I knew the word. The word Klondike is kind of a funny name. It's an odd word, but I couldn't tell you any of the stories. And so it was a piece of American history and Canadian history that I just didn't know that much about. But because I'm drawn to stories of the North, I did a little research, and it was, you know, far more than I ever expected. And I guess being a writer and on the lookout for interesting stories, I realized, you know, there had not been really a popular history of it written for many decades, but there had been a lot of work done by historians since then. And so there was a chance to tell the story as a narrative. And really, I mean, that's what I'm looking for. I'm not a historian. I'm not an academic. I wasn't going to come up with some great new insight or some fact that nobody had seen before. I think what I can bring is a chance to tell the story in a new and different way, and as well as I can, and being able to tell it, you know, as a narrative. And so what some people, they call that like reading like a novel, right? Like it just reads like a story. So once I got into it, I guess I realized, you know, it's a bit of a disaster movie, right? Like there's shipwrecks and avalanches and people die of scurvy and famine and they kill each other. And it's, you know, I could bring a more modern sensibility, I guess, to it and see it in that way.
Wow. Okay, so the story takes place in at the last part of the 1800s, and Alaska was just recently part of the United States. According to the book, it's 1867. So all this is new, practically unexplored territory for many North Americans. Can you tell us more of the conditions that these people had to endure, and at this time I don't know how much they are prepared to endure these low temperatures? I mean, I live in Canada, and when I first came here I thought I was gonna die. You know, I couldn't even
Right.
imagine in my wildest dream what real cold was like. So these people don't have the equipment that we have nowadays. Yeah, can you tell us about the struggles that they had to face as they were looking for gold?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, of course, people had lived there for thousands of years, like indigenous people, the Tlingit, the Tagish people. You know, they had lived there and hunted or fished or traded, but they, you know, they knew gold was there, but they had no use for it. And so it was just kind of a curiosity. And then Alaska was purchased from the Russians. But, you know, at first, when the Russians had owned it, they only fished on the coasts. Like white people, outsiders, prospectors had not really spent much time along the rivers except for fur traders. The Hudson's Bay Company, which is famous in Canada, of course, you know, had sent fur traders, but they weren't really looking for gold either. So when gold was discovered in 1896 in what became known as Bonanza Creek and then El Dorado Creek, which is right next to it off the Yukon, you know, it set off this stampede of people from across Canada and the United States, over North America, South America too, and from overseas, Europeans came. And I think what's important to know about the people that went on that stampede, like you say, like they, not only did they not have the equipment, but they were actually no better prepared than like you or I would be, you know, as like they were urban people who lived in apartment buildings and rode streetcars, and most of them had electricity, and many of them had indoor plumbing, and it was the subways were just being developed starting in New York City, right? Like, so all this, it was a really a modern life. And then you had people in leather shoes and suits, you know, getting on trains and going to the West Coast and getting on a boat in Seattle or Victoria or Vancouver or whatever, and going up there. And they had just a bunch of equipment that they purchased. There were a lot of scammers trying to tell them what to buy. They probably didn't always have the right winter clothes, like you say. They didn't bring enough food. They brought things they didn't need. They brought, you know, one guy brought a lawn polo set. Like people would bring a piano or like furniture. Like there was just no sense of what they were getting themselves into. And that's why so many died or turned back early, because they get to the ports in Alaska. And the route was kind of well established in the newspapers. You went up and over the pass, either the White Pass or the Chilkoot Pass. And then you kind of had to walk down to one of these lakes, and then you would build a boat and then paddle the rest of the way down the Yukon River. But I mean, do you know how to build a boat? Like and if you don't, you're as well prepared as they were, most of them, who had no idea, had never built a boat, had never done most of these things.
What is it about gold that drive these people crazy? I mean, the statistics now are as remote as the statistics were at that time, yet people risk their whole life in search for this little piece of metal that they probably don't even know much about. But it seems like a spirit take over them and is more powerful than, I mean, I'm reading about Robert Henderson and all the dangers that he faced for this
Right?
piece of metal.
That's right. So, I mean, I have two answers to that question. One is that the United States had just gone through a terrible depression, economic depression, the worst that the country had ever known. It was the Panic of 1893. And so people really faced severe economic hardship. They made very little money if they had a job. Many lost their homes, their mortgages were underwater, banks failed, railroads failed. It was very similar to what, you know, the Great Recession and other depressions that our country has known. So people were desperate economically. But but why gold? I mean, there's also, at the time, there was, and could get a little technical, but there was both a gold standard and a silver standard for money. And dollars that were backed by silver were not worth as much as those backed by gold. So there actually was a real interest. The rich held the gold-backed dollars for themselves. Everybody else had to use these less valuable silver dollars. That explains the economics, but why were people willing to take such risks? On one hand, like you say, it sounds crazy, right? And like, what did these people believe would happen? On the other hand, we see this happening all over the world today, where people come from Latin America up north, or people come from sub-Saharan Africa and try to get to Europe. And they're not after gold, but they want a job, they want, more opportunity, and they're willing to do just incredibly risky things, cross deserts, sail on ships, and lots of people die trying to come to the United States and get across the southern border. So on the one hand, it's like, well, what did they think would happen? And isn't this crazy? And on the other, when people are trying to, when they're poor and desperate, people will do, really incredible things for a chance to give their families a better life, right?
Right. Okay. Yeah, we see them. It's just that the statistics are so far against them. I mean, when we think of immigrants, we see a whole bunch of them. I'm an immigrant myself, succeeding and building a life.
Right.
But in the case of gold prospectors, I mean, a very small percentage, if you could say less than 1%, ever succeed. So in such a facing, and at the same time, there are things like trading on furs that at that time was also a source of money for in the same terrain, but less risky, I guess. The higher probability of making some money.
That's a really good point, because this chance of actually getting rich, you know, of the 100,000 people or so that went, something like half or 2/3 never made it. Either they turned around, they gave up, or they died going up. And then of the people that made it, very few ever actually even tried mining for gold. And out of those very few that tried, a tiny, tiny percentage got anything like rich. So you ended up, like you say, 1% were rich and 99% either didn't make it or stayed poor. You had terrible odds. And in fact, the economic desperation that they were fleeing, you know, this 1% and 99%, like there was back at home in New York or Toronto or wherever, was just recreated. You know, there's a reason that the rush only lasted from, say, about the summer of 1897 through 1899. I mean, even from the discovery of gold until, I mean, I shouldn't give away the end of the book, but Dawson City burns down. The main boom town burns down. That's really only like 1,000 days. It was really a mania in a very short period of time. And eventually people realized that they weren't getting rich, and people stopped coming, you know, because like you say, the odds were just so long.
Well, okay. Well, this is almost like a mirror image of our soul and our ambition and desire to get rich. I wonder if you could tell us one more time the title of the book and where can the listeners follow you and find out more about the work that you do?
Yes, thank you. So the title is Stampede, Gold Fever and Disaster in the Klondike. And you can find me at briancastner.com, just my name, or I'm on Twitter. I spend way too much time on Twitter, and that's Brian_Castner is where to find me on Twitter.
Brian, thank you so much for your time.
Yes, thank you.